"Wir haben uns verirrt," said the young soldier. They had all come to a halt and were looking about. Jonathan gazed up at the one who had spoken. He could see that he was puzzled, worried. The others acted just as perplexed. "Vielen seid wir Gasken. Vielen sind wir die am Leben. Gott haf uns." Jonathan, wondering what they said, saw only worry on their face. The young one kept fingering his thin mustache. The tall one rubbed the scar. It seemed to bother him. Perhaps, thought Jonathan, it was the dampness, like his father's leg. The Hessians talked among themselves again, keeping their voices low as if they might be overheard. As they gazed now one way, now another, Jonathan watched intently. He decided that they did not know which way to go. They continued to walk slowly and close together. Jonathan, chilled and damp, made no resistance to the chafing rope. The fog, sometimes thin, sometimes dense, floated before them, around them, over them, like some living thing. "Oh, Gott!" cried the tall soldier, flinging up an arm to stop them. Instantly, the two other soldiers brought their guns about and stared where the tall one pointed. Jonathan, as frightened as they, looked too. What he saw was there and then not there, moving so quickly in and out of sight as if to make him uncertain he had seen anything at all. He thought it had been a man, and even in the briefest second believed it had been the corporal, but the figure had vanished so quickly in the fog that it was impossible for Jonathan to be sure. "Esche nights," said the young soldier. He laughed with nervous relief. "Ta was," said the tall one with indignation. His heart beating rapidly, Jonathan turned about, wondering if there were other Americans near. He saw not the slightest clue, nor did he know how he felt, glad or sorry. Before he could consider some action, he felt the rope about his waist jerk as the old soldier hauled him closer. The soldiers, standing still, seemed to be growing more nervous. They talked quietly, but with great urgency to one another. Jonathan, his head hurting from being unable to decide what to do, closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw the soldiers were standing absolutely still, straining to listen. Nothing. The fog settled deeper. The older soldier finally said something. To Jonathan, it sounded like a curse. Whatever it was, the other two agreed. They all began to move again. Jonathan looked back. Glad or sorry? His head seemed to throb with it. Glad or sorry? He did not know. 5:30. From somewhere they could hear the lowing call of a cow. At once they stopped. It was a plaintive sound, like the signal of distress. They faced the direction from which it came. The sound repeated, low and just as mournful. Without saying anything to one another, the Hessians began to move in the direction of the sound, crossing the road and entering the dark, soaking woods. Keeping Jonathan close, they moved with elaborate care. When the cow lowed again, closer yet, they halted. Jonathan wondered at the sound. That it was a cow in distress, he had no doubt. He wondered if the Hessians could or would understand. Did they, he asked himself, have cows in the land they came from? The tall soldier unwrapped his gun, primed it anew, then wrapped it quickly once more. To his pack he affixed Jonathan's gun so it was secure and out of the way. It was almost impossible to see anything. Still they stood there, waiting for another call from the cow. The sound of dripping water made Jonathan tense. When the call did come, it seemed closer than it had before. Jonathan felt relieved. The soldiers turned and began to hurry. Within minutes they came up against a rail fence and what appeared in the fog to be an open space beyond. Again the cow called, but they could not see across the field. The other two soldiers brought their guns around and checked the priming. Once more Jonathan thought about the corporal and the other Americans. Perhaps they were close, even across the field. Should he send out a warning call? Who was he more afraid of, the Hessians or the Americans? The soldiers climbed the fence. Jonathan attempted to follow, only to become entangled in the rope. The young soldier leaned over the top rail and began to untie the rope. The old one, seeing what was happening, glared at the young soldier, but then turned back across the field, distracted, when the cow bleated again. The young soldier pulled away the rope. Slowly Jonathan climbed the fence and joined the Hessians. As they began to cross over the spongy pasture ground, the old soldier made Jonathan walk in front. In the open area, the fog grew thinner. The Hessians kept a few paces apart, their muskets ready, their bayonets fixed as if they were advancing on an enemy. Jonathan stared in the direction they were moving, hoping he would see whatever they were approaching first. The fog lifted some more, and Jonathan saw the cow. A rope, broken, dangled from her neck. Beyond the cow was a dark house. 5:40. The house was smaller than Jonathan's own. Swedish style, it was made of logs, chinked and decaying clay, and clogged with mounds of moss. In front of the doorway, a shallow covered porch ran the full width of the house. It looked deserted, containing no sense of light or life. The cow, standing before the closed door, lifted her head, stretching and lowing. Not far from the house, off to one side, was a smaller building, whose double doors were also closed. With great care, their boots sticking in the wet ground, they continued to advance, Jonathan still in front of the Hessians. When they came close to the house, they stopped. The cow swung her head up and around, looking at them, her tongue flicking. Again she called, deep and long. Jonathan understood that she was waiting to be milked, waiting for someone to come from the house, but no one did. Unsure of what to do, the soldier stood still, exchanging anxious glances. The young one and the tall one kept looking to the oldest, waiting for him to make up his mind. It was he, finally, who touched Jonathan on the arm. "Los," he said, pushing him forward. "Mach sie tough off." Jonathan took a few tentative steps forward, then stopped and turned. He looked at the young soldier, but he was impassive. The old soldier waved his arm, and Jonathan understood him to mean that he should continue. Just to be certain, he took 3 more steps, then turned yet again. The soldier nodded. Jonathan stepped on the porch. It sagged slightly. Using a post, he pulled himself up and listened. Nothing. Approaching the door, he reached out a hand, withdrew it, and gazed back toward the soldiers. "Los!" came the impatient, whispered command. The old one lifted his gun. Jonathan heard the click as he drew back the flintlock. Nervously, Jonathan knocked timidly on the door. "Nakimel!" the older soldier called in a hoarse whisper. A second knock. Still no answer. Finally, Jonathan reached for the latch, squeezed it, and then pushed. The door, swinging on old hinges, opened halfway. Jonathan glanced back. The Hessians, who had advanced a few more paces, urged him on. Carefully, Jonathan pushed the door completely open and stepped inside. It was a one-room house with a dirt floor, one oil-papered window, and a hearth on the far side. A table stood in the middle of the room. One low counter, Jonathan thought it a bed, was against the wall. 2 old chairs, a number of boxes against the wall. On the table, a few things that had been left. A cup, a tin plate, a candle, and a stand. A wooden shovel stood by the door. It was a poor house, a meager house with a look of having been quickly abandoned. Jonathan turned to the door as the tall soldier came in, his great size filling the door frame. Within moments the other 2 entered. The young soldiers began to poke about. When he found half a loaf of bread, he flung it on the table, where it landed with a dull thump. Outside, the cow bleated. "It wants milking," said Jonathan. "Was das?" the young soldier said to him. The tall soldier spoke curtly. To Jonathan, they all seemed angry, frustrated. Again the cow called. "Milking," Jonathan said, speaking carefully, first pointing outside, then making milking motions with his hands. "You can drink it," he said, making a drinking motion. The young soldier looked at him quizzically, until, with sudden comprehension, he laughed. "Milkin'!" he cried. "We're comin' down de milkin' trinkin'." Thinking he had made himself understood, Jonathan cast about for a bucket, but couldn't find one. The young soldier, not understanding, pushed him encouragingly toward the door. Jonathan went. The soldier stood watching him from the doorway. Once outside, Jonathan moved the cow and stroked her about her ears, still searching for a bucket. Remembering the shed he had seen off to one side, he caught the soldier's attention and pointed towards it. The soldier winked at him from the porch where he stood. The wink made Jonathan grin and filled him with a sense of camaraderie. Feeling good, almost happy, he walked across the way and pulled the shed doors open. He looked inside. Sitting on the ground was a child.